Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome on behalf of Bord Bia to today's breakfast briefing here in the Clayton Hotel. On Friday, June the 24th, following that landmark Brexit announcement earlier that morning, we began to engage with many of you who are exporting to the UK market, and we issued a survey to probably most of you or to your companies from that day onwards to learn how we should proceed going forward and address an outcome that most had, perhaps until then, scarcely contemplated. And the overriding need identified from those one-to-one discussions and from the survey was not surprisingly the need for more information. Information that, notwithstanding the avalanche of media analysis that has ensued over the last week and a half, would help us to explore the implications for our food and drink exports to a market that by a considerable distance is our single largest. And it is that which brings us here together this morning to understand and assess those implications and how we might now move forward together and best deal with them. The most important, perhaps the most welcome outcome from the survey was, in fact, the reassuring sense of calm with which respondents were considering the result of the referendum. And while one in every four of our respondents felt that the Brexit result would lead to a reduction in their exports to the UK, 6 out of 10, in fact, didn't exercise that option, choosing instead a wait-and-see approach or feeling that their exports would be unaffected. And in the context of the decline in sterling that followed in the immediate aftermath of the Brexit referendum announcement, that is quite an interesting result. It was, of course, not surprising that exchange rate volatility was the overriding concern of all of the exporters, and of 6 out of the 10 of them who regarded it as the most immediate concern, followed by the prospect, if not an immediate one, of the raising of tariffs and border controls. And while 1 in every 3 said that they would search out new markets, most, in fact, opted for alternative priorities, seeking to see how they could reduce their costs or how they might recover their currency losses through higher prices. The majority were then only beginning to consider in the immediate aftermath of the referendum what their options were going forward. Few had, in fact, a plan in place prior to the outcome of the referendum. And so it is our hope that today's event will help us all to advance all of our deliberations in this respect. And if we can't resolve the uncertainties, and clearly we can't, that at least we can learn how we can begin to live with them and how we can learn to deal with them. Brexit challenge affects every sector of our industry. The UK is not just our single largest market for food and drink. We export more food and drink to the UK market, 41% last year of the total, than we do to all of the other European Union member states combined, which last year took 31% of the total. And here in this chart we can see the composition of those exports, led by meat, made up of beef, lamb, pork and bacon, followed by dairy products, prepared foods, beverages, and so on. And here we can see just how important for each one of those sectors the UK market is. In many cases, it accounts for more than 50%. It is the single most important market for every single subsector of the industry, with the exception of sheep meat and seafood, as you can see here on the right-hand side of the chart, whose largest market is, of course, France. And even in the case of the dairy sector, which is arguably one of the most diversified of our subsectors of the food industry, and exported to 130 markets last year, even for that, 65% of our total cheddar exports are destined for the UK market. The importance of the UK market is not surprising. We share similar culture and language. We share similar tastes and preferences, driven by similar attitudes and behaviours, and we have a long history of trading with one another. In fact, our focus on the UK market, our industry's focus on the UK market, given the significant import deficit that it has, and taking account of these traits, it really makes us, in so very many ways, the perfect fit. And it is not any sense of lethargy on behalf of our industry to search out alternative markets. Our industry exports to 175 markets every year, and last year The fastest growing markets were to be found in North America, in Asia and China. North America, Asia and the Middle East. China is in fact our 5th largest market overall today. It's our 2nd largest market for dairy and our 2nd largest market for pork products. The importance of the UK market is borne out by the fact that the majority of our exporters clearly believe that serving it maximizes our market returns for those who choose in the segments they compete in. The UK market, for example, is the highest priced beef market in the world. It has a significant import deficit, and Ireland is the leading supplier. But now in the context of Brexit, clearly, we have to wait and see how the negotiations that will ensue and see whether the goalposts are set to move and to what extent they might move and change the playground. In the meantime, it will be clear to all of us as well that our dependence on the UK market is in fact a mutual one. Ireland is in fact the UK's single largest market for its food and drink exports, and by a considerable distance again. In fact, the UK exports more food and drink to Ireland than it does to the next 2 most important markets, France and Netherlands combined. So there is this significant mutual interdependence between our 2 markets. And it is therefore in our common interests to ensure that the negotiations that follow for both of our interests should be satisfactory in terms of the negotiations that will ensue between the European Union on our behalf and the UK. In the meantime, amidst all of this uncertainty, clearly the greatest uncertainty will continue to be that surrounding exchange rate volatility. And it's not just for our exporters to the UK and for exporters to markets where they will encounter competition from sterling-based exports, but also for those who are seeking or have shelf space here in the Irish market and who are now set to encounter renewed competition from UK imports benefiting from a weaker sterling. It is a challenge with which the majority of Irish businesses have significant experience going back, as we can see from this chart extending back over the last 5 or 6 years. Albeit, as we can see today and heard in the news this morning, we are now reaching the upper limits of that experience. And it is also clear that the scale of the challenges are going to vary from sector to sector, from business to business. The challenges facing private label will be different from the challenges facing brand manufacturers. It will vary for categories that are competing primarily with other Euro-based suppliers and for those who are competing with local sterling-based manufacturers. And then there is, of course, the implications for our cross-border trade, where primary production moves in either direction, for primary or secondary processing in either location, and in an industry where between the UK and Ireland there has been a growing level of integration over time. So there is much to discuss, to debate and to explore in our discussions this morning. And we have an excellent lineup of speakers, 2 panels of experts to help us do that. And it is our hope in Bord Bia that arising from it we will all come away somewhat more prepared as to how we're going to face the challenges ahead. And I will come back very briefly towards the end, at the very end of the proceedings, and set out for you some of the next steps from our part in terms of how we see ourselves helping you navigate through these new and uncharted waters in the period ahead.